the person behind the WAGVA logo. And the reason why my camera isn't on is because it's not working. And when it goes on, I freeze and also look a little bit like a Andy Warhol painting. So here I am. I'm Margot Bennett, the Executive Director of Women Against Gun Violence and also the facilitator of today's learning event. So welcome to the Women Against Gun Violence Lunch and Learn on the California legislative process. Many of you already know WAGVA. We were founded 30 years ago, and since that time, the men and women of our Board of Directors and Speakers Bureau have worked tirelessly and fearlessly to prevent gun violence in our communities, state, and nation through both impactful legislation, like background checks for all gun and ammunition sales, and banning assault-style weapons and high-capacity magazines, as well as through our cutting-edge programs on safe gun storage, on voting, and on divestment. Our work has been and continues to be a model for communities across the United States. Our goal today is that you will gain the knowledge and confidence to advocate on behalf of strong and impactful laws that will help keep all of us safe from the epidemic of gun violence that is sweeping our country. Before I introduce you to our guest speaker, Amanda Wilcox, here are a few details. 1, please make sure you are on mute during the presentation. 2, many of you are on camera, so please check your surroundings now to avoid embarrassment later. 3, Amanda will be answering questions at the end of the presentation. So please enter your questions into chat, and then she will do her best to get to all of them. And finally, 4, we will be distributing to you via email by the end of this week the Lunch and Learn materials and links to relevant information. So states with strong gun safety laws have fewer gun deaths, and California has some of the best gun safety laws in the country. For that, we owe Amanda Wilcox and her husband, Nick, a debt of gratitude. And that is why we presented our 2016 Courageous Leadership Award to them. In 2001, Amanda and Nick lost their daughter, Laura, to gun violence. Turning grief into action, they have since worked tirelessly to prevent tragedies like theirs. Amanda took on the volunteer role of legislative chair for Brady, California, and with their determination and steadfastness, they have personally guided 83 California gun safety bills into law. Because of their efforts, we are all safer. Because of their efforts, states throughout the nation have a model to replicate. Because of their efforts, other survivors of gun violence have hope and mentors for action. So please join me as we welcome Amanda Wilcox to our Lunch and Learn. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Margot, for that kind of introduction. And it is great to see familiar faces and familiar names. Many of you may know pieces of the legislative process, but hopefully with what I share with you today, you'll have a much better understanding of the timeline and how it all works. So I'm gonna try and share my screen now and see if this works. And it does.
Yay.
Yeah, there we go. Good. I think this should be about half an hour, which should allow plenty of time for questions at the end. So I just want to emphasize the importance of the advocate's role in terms of making public policy. Public policy decisions, of course, can play a very important role in public safety, which is our issue. Think of automobiles and the laws that have been passed to regulate drivers, to make cars safer. And clearly, many of the measures have passed have had a direct impact in the success in reducing passenger death per vehicle mile in the last century. Many of those laws really led to that reduction being one of the public health success stories in the last century. And obviously, in terms of firearms and gun violence prevention, our laws can make a big difference. Margot already shared about the drop in our gun death rate in California, which has the strongest gun laws in the nation. Stakeholders and policy experts play a key role. Legislators often have an area of interest, but they have many areas that they are interested in studying and moving legislation on, and they generally do not know as much as we all know about this issue that we greatly care about. California has been well organized. The coalition in California, certainly during the time I was involved, we have a group called the California Firearms Strategy Group that has various stakeholders from throughout the state that would have vigorous discussions, share research and ideas, and really delve into policy and what would be most impactful and where our gaps are in California law. And out of that coalition came the ideas from many of the policies that we eventually enacted in California. In my early days involvement, our important partner was then called the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, now part of Giffords. Attorneys that are very well versed in policy, would draft many of our bills. Brady obviously played an important role, but all the groups around the state were critical to our efforts. And Women Against Gun Violence, of course, has played a key role in Southern California, in the LA area, been very involved in getting local ordinances passed. And those local ordinances often drove the momentum for statewide policy. So Women Against Gun Violence efforts throughout the years at the local level has played an important role in what we've been able to enact at the state level. And hopefully California can drive more action at the national level. But your opinions, knowledge, and experience are very important, particularly if you are a constituent. So I can't remember which bill it was, but I remember meeting with a assembly member in San Diego, and with me was one of her constituents. And I made all the policy arguments inside the research about this bill that we were trying to get passed. And the constituent wasn't steeped in the policy, but she just shared her experience as a teacher and how now in the schools where she was working, they were having lockdown drills. In case there was a school shooting, they had drills for it. And that really shook up the legislator. And I remember meeting with her a week later or whatever, and she had been on the fence. She was supporting our legislation, and all she would talk about was this constituent and what she shared about being a teacher and the fact that schools were having lockdowns. So why we care about the issue, our personal experience about gun violence, maybe a friend or a friend of a friend who was lost in a shooting and you've seen the impact on that family and a community. It doesn't even have to be direct experience, but why you care, particularly as a constituent, really matters. Legislators care what their constituents are concerned about. So your voice matters, and I urge you to use it. So I've lived in Colorado now for 17 months. And what I am struck by is the difference between different states and how their legislature and legislative process is set up. It gives me great appreciation for California. The process we have for passing bills in California all makes perfect sense to me. There's a logical schedule. Maybe it's just because I had 15 years to learn it and get comfortable with it, and I have a big learning curve still in front of me in the state of Colorado. But in California, we have a full-time legislature, unlike Colorado. So being a legislator is their job of an assembly member or a state senator. They get paid, and a legislator generally gets, at least in 2021, the number was about 120,000 a year. I suspect it's a little higher now. Leadership in the legislature would get more than that. We have two houses in California, the state assembly and the state senate. In the state assembly, there are 80 members. Each is elected every 2 years, and they can serve a maximum of 12 years. Each legislator in the assembly represents about 465,000 plus people. That number has dropped from the last decade because the population of California went down in the last census. The current makeup of the assembly is 62 Democrats and 18 Republicans. We are indeed a deep blue state, or California is. In the state senate, there are 40 members. Each is elected for 4-year terms, and they can serve a maximum of 12 years. Actually, any assembly member or senator, their maximum is 12 years of service. That could be split between the assembly and senate. For example, they could do 2 terms in the assembly, that'd be 4 years, and then 2 terms in the senate, that'd be 8 years to make that 12-year maximum. So it's 20 years as a senator, assembly member, or a combination of the two. 20 senators, or half of them, are up for election every 2 years. And then each senator represents about 931,000 plus constituents. That's twice the number that each assembly member represents. And of course, there are twice the number of assembly members than senators. The current makeup of the Senate is 32 Democrats and 8 Republicans. So the political realities in California, as I mentioned earlier, and as you all know, California is a deep blue state. We have we had last year, or last session, and again this session, we have a super majority of Democrats in both the state assembly and the state senate. So normally to get a bill passed, just a simple majority is needed to pass the legislation. So that would be 41 votes in the assembly and 21 in the state senate. However, with a supermajority, which is 2/3 of each chamber, the legislature can pass emergency measures. They could raise taxes, or they can put initiatives on the ballot. Last year, there was an emergency measure to change California's concealed carry law in response to a Supreme Court decision in June. There was broad support among Democrats, but we did not have 2/3 of the Democrats. I think it was in the assembly, and so that bill failed. If we had moved that, if that had been moved just as a simple majority bill under the normal timeline, it would have been enacted. But there's an urgency clause in it because the idea was to have the policy go into effect immediately, and that's why it needed a 2/3 vote. So sometimes that's a political call, whether you can think you can get it passed as an emergency measure, but other times there's no choice. There has to be a 2/3 vote if it's related to a tax increase or putting a ballot initiative on the ballot. So in the assembly, 2/3 would be 54 assembly members, and in the Senate, 27. So with the number of Democrats, we're well above those numbers. Governor Newsom, of course, is a strong supporter of GVP. I don't think California has ever had a governor this strong on the issue. In fact, I don't think there's any governor in the country that is as strong as Newsom or as passionate as Newsom on the issue. And he's really become a terrific spokesperson. And he works closely with the policy groups on legislation and provides input, and together, we come up with bills that he is eager to sign often. Attorney General Rob Bonta is also an extremely strong supporter of gun violence prevention. Now that we had that when Bill Lockyer was Attorney General back in the, when was that, late 90s, early 2000s. But then Attorney General Jerry Brown, Kamala Harris, and certainly Becerra. The three of those were varying degrees on how they were on our issue, but none of them were champions for gun violence prevention. I think all three of them found the issue difficult in their position or interfere with their future political plans. Harris obviously has changed at the national level, but the policies are contemplating at the national level are not cutting edge, like the policies we're working on in California when she was Attorney General. So I think it was harder for her with the kinds of policies we were moving here. But Banta is truly a champion, again, working closely with the coalition. And of course, the Attorney General is very important because the Department of Justice, for most of our laws, the Department of Justice is responsible for their implementation and enforcement. So that's a critical supporter. The other point is that the politics and issues around gun violence prevention are changing. Back in the 2000s, in my early days of working on gun violence prevention legislation, a number of our bills failed, particularly in the Senate. We needed 21 votes to pass a bill, and we hoped to get 21. Sometimes we didn't. We really had to count noses to make sure that we had the votes and really lobby these offices hard. That changed as our legislature got bluer. It also changed, I'd say the key milestone is the Aurora and Sandy Hook shootings, which both happened in 2012. And after that, legislators around the country, but particularly in California, became much more supportive. And we started having an easier time getting our bills passed. And that trend has only continued. Sadly, as the shootings keep continuing, there's more and more eagerness to introduce gun bills and come up with bold policies in California. At one point, I thought there was firearm fatigue. Maybe that was before the Parkland shooting, but then again, as the shootings continued and seemed to get worse and worse, the legislature became more eager. So rather than there being a problem with getting gun control bills passed or any resistance to that, really the key issue has become more about unintended impacts of firearm bills, which I will go into in a little bit later when I talk about the committee structure. So every piece of legislation, every bill starts with an idea, a policy idea. For example, we in our coalition wanted to, and successfully enacted last year, a bill to impose certain conduct and regulations on gun dealers in California. And so we have this idea of what we want to require, what should be in the bill. In that case, Brady, attorneys at Brady, drafted the legislation. Often the Law Center with Giffords does. We would draft legislation. We would look for an author to introduce the bill. And once we found an author or a tentative author and they agreed to introduce this bill, that author would submit a draft of the bill to the Office of Legislative Counsel. Legislative Counsel actually writes the text of the bill. We don't, but we would submit drafts or proposed bill language, so it'd be more likely to be how we wanted the language to be, how we wanted the text to be. But a legislator could just say to Legislative Counsel, hey, I want to do a bill about safe storage of firearms. I want to make it a crime if a parent doesn't store their gun so that child can't gain access. And they may just say that idea, and there would be Legislative Counsel that really writes the text of the bill from beginning to end. But we would like to have drafts that be more likely be language that we wanted. Sometimes there's delicate dance where you think you have an author for the bill, but you're not exactly sure. They may want to do a different bill instead. You have other authors who want an idea for a gun bill, and you might have them do the bill, but you have this preferred author that you're waiting to hear back from. So there's sort of this delicate dance while we're trying to match an author or legislator with our priority bill or priority bills. So it's just this very difficult time of uncertainty. Are you going to have an author or legislator to carry the bill? It's going to be the one you want, or are they going to change their mind at the last minute and you're stuck with not having a bill at all? It's always a stressful time. That's the time we're in right now, by the way. But once you have the author and they submit the bill idea to the legislative council and they get the draft and they get the text back, they can introduce the bill. At that point is when the bill becomes public and the bill is assigned a number. If it's an assembly bill, it will be AB something. If it's a Senate bill, it will be SB something. The first bill of the session will be AB1 in the assembly, and the Senate will be SB1. The bill has to be in print for 30 days. In other words, where the public can view it for 30 days before any action can be taken on the bill. The bill will be assigned to policy committees by the Rules Committee, which the leader of the Senate and leadership in the Assembly sit on Rules Committee, and that determines the path of the bill, if you will. That's a bigger issue, I think, in other states than in California, where it's pretty straightforward that our gun bills typically go to Public Safety Committee and Appropriations Committee. So after the Policy Committee, a bill will go to the Appropriations Committee, where the fiscal impact of the bill is looked at. If it passes its Appropriations Committee, the bill will go to the entire floor for a vote. So if it's an assembly member who introduced an assembly bill or an AB bill, it goes to Assembly Policy Committee, Appropriations Committee, and then to the full assembly floor for a vote. If it passes the assembly floor, then it would repeat the process in the opposite house. Would go to the Senate Policy Committee, the Senate Appropriation Committee, and the full Senate floor. If the bill is amended after it passes the Senate or the opposite house, it would have to come back to the House of Origin for that House of Origin to concur on the amendments. And then the bill will go to the governor's desk. Now I'm going to explain this in more detail later, so don't worry if you don't follow all that. As I mentioned earlier, for firearm bills, generally our bills go to the Committee on Public Safety and then the Committee on Appropriations. The two public safeties, that'd be the Assembly Public Safety and the Senate Public Safety, are committees that have become very, very favorable for us. As I mentioned earlier, the idea of a quote unquote gun control bill, gun violence prevention bill, they're all supportive of gun violence prevention efforts in general. The staff of the committee are, and the Democrats on the committee are. That's why they're placed on those committees. They're in safe districts and they're supportive of and like-minded on many of our issues, particularly gun violence prevention. What has changed in more recent years is how the committees are evaluating bills. In the earlier days, it was more, is there a problem? Will this policy or this bill idea address that problem? Can the bill be implemented as we say? And then, of course, the Appropriations Committee looks at the cost of the bill. In more recent years, the debate on our gun bills is more around unintended. Those issues I've just outlined, or those questions, are important and continue to be important, but also the issue of whether there is a disproportionate impact and unnecessary criminalization of people, if those are going to be consequences of this bill. So particularly we're looking at, the committee's looking at how a bill will impact communities of color, or people in poverty, And will people will be unnecessarily making felons out of people and having that impact on the rest of their lives? And should we be doing that for this policy? So an example is that we had wanted to do a bill that would require a gun owner to keep their gun locked up, secured and locked up when they're not at home. And the committee very much pushed back against that bill. And the reason is that if you think about it, how do you know if someone's not at home and their gun is left at home unsecured? How would one know that? One would know that if law enforcement comes to the home. When does law enforcement come to a home? Often they come to a home to evict people. So would people who are about to be evicted be disproportionately impacted by that law? That's kind of an example of how the issue's we're looking at the issue through a new lens. And that's not just in California, I think that's nationally as well. So it's just a change in how bills are examined and the lens through which people are looking through them. For the Committee on Appropriations, the Senate and the Assembly have two different standards. If the bill costs more than $150,000 in the Assembly, it goes on what's called the suspense file in the Appropriations Committee. And then for the Senate, if it costs $50,000 or more to the general fund, or $150,000 or more to a special fund, it would go on the suspense file. So the suspense file, all the bills with costs more than these thresholds sit on what's called the suspense file. And then on one day in the spring and in the summer, those two committees, the Senate and Appropriations Committee, will have their suspense file hearing and vote on all these bills with costs on the same day. And I think part of the idea is to consider them all at once. All these bills have costs, and figure out kind of what the state can pay for, as opposed to considering each bill as they move through the process of looking at them separately. So they all are considered on one day, and it's just basically a yes or no vote on these bills, whether they get out of the committee or not. Appropriations Committee is where bills that are popular among the public, among legislators, but maybe the governor has an issue with the bill or leadership does, and what we say, they die a quiet death there. It's not in a hearing just in that bill where legislators are debating it. It's just basically in the suspense file hearing, the list of bills are read and the vote is stated. It's just read by the chair. So it's a way for the legislature governor actually to stop bills where they're not on the spot in the middle of a debate or anything. So going back to the legislative process, and Margot and I talked about this last week, she particularly, I think, and I think many have confusion about how this legislative cycle works and what the deadlines are. But the last day, right now, we're in this first bullet point here. January 20th, 9 days from now, is the last day to submit bill requests to Leg Council. So remember, if a legislator wants to carry a bill, or we as sponsors, Women Against Gun Violence, Bravely, whoever, want a legislator to carry a bill, we need to make sure that the request for bill language is submitted to Leg Council by January 20th, be 9 days. That's the first important deadline that's coming up. Then on February 17th, next month, will be the last day for a bill to be introduced. So if the legislator changes their mind and they decide they don't want to do the bill after all, and you couldn't find another legislator to do it, and it's February 18th, essentially it's too late to introduce the bill. What a legislator will sometimes do is introduce a spot bill where they just change a couple words in a policy in existing law that indicates a policy area where they plan to do future legislation and they amend the bill later. So there is kind of a way around the legislation or the February 17th deadline by doing a placeholder bill, which is called a spot bill. But generally, February 17th is the day bills are introduced. That's after February 17th this year. Brady, Giffords, others will go on the state legislation website and search for all the bills related to firearms, guns, ammunition, and identify all the bills that are out there. Because there may be ones that were introduced where we haven't talked to the office. We didn't know they were coming down the pipe, but we can identify all the bills related to our issue, including the bills that we oppose. Then on April 28th is the last day for the policy committees to hear fiscal bills. Remember, most of our bills go to Public Safety Committee. Most of our gun bills are fiscal bills. Usually there's a cost to DOJ. And April 28th this year will be the last day for these policy committees to hear those bills. If the bill does not pass policy committee by that date, it will not move through the legislative process in 2023. Then on May 19th is the last day for fiscal committees to hear and report bills that were introduced in their house. So remember, I talked about the suspense file. On May 19th, often it's the day earlier, maybe May 18th, the suspense file will be heard, will be considered, and that's where there'll be this reading list of all the bills that will be going to the floor. So this is all happening in the house that the bill, what we call house of origin. So if this is an assembly bill, these dates apply to the Assembly Policy Committee and the Assembly Appropriations Committee and the Assembly floor. If it's a Senate bill, these dates apply to those committees on the Senate side. June 2nd this year will be the last day for each house to pass bills introduced in that house. So Assembly bill would have to be passed by the full Assembly floor by June 2nd, and a Senate would be by the full Senate floor. If it doesn't get out of its house of origin by that date, the bill will not progress this year. So then the deadlines continue through the summer. Now these deadlines are in the opposite house. So by July 14th, that's the last day for policy committees to pass a bill. So Assembly bill would have to be out of Senate Public Safety Committee by that date, and a Senate bill would have to be out of the Assembly Public Safety Committee by July 14th. There's a big gap after July 14th because the legislature will be on summer recess. Then on September 1st is the last day for Fiscal Committee or the Appropriations Committee to meet and report bills to the floor. So September 1st, or maybe the day before, will be the day that the Appropriations Committee hears the suspense file. But basically, each bill is in its opposite house. The Senate Appropriations Committee will be considering Assembly bills and vice versa. September 14th is the last day for each house to pass bills. That's the end of session, for the legislatures, it's the end of session. And then the governor, his deadline is October 14th to sign or veto bills. Now, that deadline actually applies to bills that reach the governor's desk after September 14th. So basically, those are the bills that are passed by the legislature probably September 7th on, because they won't get to the governor's desk until after September 14th. If a bill is passed early in the year, and that usually is because the bill does not have fiscal impact, was not held on the suspense file and Appropriations Committee. So if that bill gets to the governor during the session, he has only 12 days to sign or veto the bill. But most of our bills, they're reaching the governor at the end of session. He has 1 month to act on the bills. Then looking towards next year, 2024, in general, a bill that is enacted in 2023 goes into effect January 1st of the following year. Now, there are times that we put in the bill language to delay the effective date. Often we do that because it will reduce the cost of the bill, and therefore the bill will not be held on suspense file in the Appropriations Committee. Or we do it for other reasons. For example, there's a bill last year, AB 452, that requires Women Against Gun Violence. I think co-sponsored it and helped get it passed. Thank you, thank you. This is a bill that requires schools to notify parents and guardians of California's safe storage laws, so that we realize we want to make sure parents know about this law, so we can fully realize the benefit of this safe storage law. However, in that bill is language that requires the Department of Justice to work with the Department of Education to come up with this memo, the language for the memo, and they need time to do that. And I think in the bill, it's a deadline of July that they will come up with this notification, the wording of this notification, and then the first notification will start at the beginning of the first semester of what would be the 23-24 school year. So that kind of makes sense that time, how that timing works, because of the development of the language that needs to occur, and then because of the school schedule. But in general, statutes take effect January 1. Of course, unless it's an urgency bill like we tried to do last year, in which case it would have taken effect as soon as the governor signed it. Then on January 3rd, the legislature reconvenes. Now, I'm not going to show the dates because we don't have the dates yet, but also in January 24, about in the middle of the month, there will be an opportunity for bills that did not pass out of their first public safety committee the preceding spring for them to be heard in the committee. So, for example, if there's a bill in the Assembly Public Safety Committee that the committee doesn't like, is pushing back, the author, maybe rather than having a vote and the bill fail passage, may what they call pull the bill, not have it be heard, and then try and work, either change the bill or generate support and have the bill heard next January. We did that actually on our first school notification about safe storage bill several years ago. Because the original bill ran into problems and we amended it into the notification bill. So there is kind of a second chance on bills to pass in January in their House of Origin. It would have to be heard by the committee at a date in mid-January. That date's not set yet for 2024. And then actually get out of Appropriations Committee and pass the full assembly, in this case, the full House of Origin by the end of the month. That's an unusual situation. Usually a bill is passed in 1 year, and then new bills are introduced the following year. So in January 2024, the bill number will start with where it left off in 2023. So the first bill introduced in January may be AB, I don't know, 1996, depending on how many bills have already been introduced. So then the session is 2 years, an odd year, 2023, and 2024. And then there's election. There'll be new legislators seated after the election in 2024. And then you have a new session starting in 2025, 2026. Each session is 2 years. Just to quickly review the process, yellow is where the bill is first introduced. So that's the House of Origin, could be Assembly or Senate, but a bill is introduced in the House of Origin. It goes to committee hearings, usually Public Safety Committee in our case, Appropriations Committee. It goes to the full floor. If it passes, it goes to the opposite house, which is the blue. Has committee hearings there in the opposite house. Also goes to the full floor. If the bill was not amended, then it goes to the governor after it passes the opposite house. If the bill was amended in the opposite house, which is the blue here, then it needs to go back to the House of Origin, which is the yellow, where they concur or agree to the amendments, and then it goes to the governor. And then again, the governor typically has 30 days, 12 days, or 30 days, depending on when the bill gets to him, to sign or veto a bill. And then most bills become law January 1st the next year. And then I just want to mention this Info Legislature website, which is a great resource for viewing the text of the bill. You can see what the amendments are, read the vote count if you want to know how a particular legislator voted on the bill. Read the committee analysis. Often in the analysis, there would be excerpts from the support letters and opposed letters, so you can see what the opposition is saying about the bill, and you can find where in this process that I just shared the bill is. What committee is it waiting to be heard in, or whatever. So that's a very important website. You can also look at the State Assembly website and State Senate website, learn about the committees, who's on the committees, and all that. So I think with that, probably went a little longer than I wanted. But hopefully that will give us some time to respond to questions. And I see there are some in the chat.
Yes, hi. So this is Margot, and I was typing up my questions. So I want to ask you that, for example, if WAGA, Women Against Gun Violence, has an idea for a gun violence prevention legislation, but we're not a Brady, we're not a Giffords, we're not staffed up with attorneys who write legislation. Can we still approach a legislator with the idea and then they write it up, their staff writes it up?
Yes. So yeah, any individual. I mean, many legislators carry bills that a constituent suggested to them. Again, they really care what constituents say, or just something that impacted them that they decided to care about. So Women Against Gun Violence could go to any legislator and say, I have this bill idea, will you carry this bill? I mean, presumably, and I think you would, Women Against Gun Violence would have some idea of what they want in the bill, what the rationale is for this policy. And the legislator's office could try drafting the bill, their staff, or they could just take your ideas and their ideas and submit it to Leg Counsel, and Leg Counsel, the Office of Legislative Counsel, would draft the bill. So, I would think with Women Against Gun Violence, there's sort of two routes you would go. One is most of your membership, and you are based in LA and probably more known in the LA area, and finding an LA legislator that maybe you have a relationship with already, or someone within your organization does, that you approach them, or you go to one of the known champions of gun violence prevention. It's not hard to see who they are. The people who've authored bills in previous years. Probably many of these legislators, you already know their name, and ask if they would introduce the bill. Now, though the deadline for submitting languages is 9 days, and the deadline for introducing a bill is in February, generally these conversations should be starting in November and December, because again, it takes a while often to convince a legislator, or they're interested, but there are these other bills maybe they're thinking of too. You want to get to them early and give them time. So I would, in general, I think in November and December, particularly November, is a good time to approach legislators about a bill idea. Does that answer your question?
Yes, and it sounds like we might have missed the boat for this for the first year of this 2-year legislative session. Maybe. Right,
but if there's someone interested, but you need more time to figure it out, they could do a spot bill.
Yeah.
Right. The first year that my husband and I were doing this was a year we did the microstamping bill, and we thought he had an author, and he backed down, and we were frantic. We didn't know what to do. And actually I think his name was Devin with Women Against Gun Violence. And because you guys are who you are, he had a relationship with Mike Fuhrer, who's a new assembly member. And I remember Devin, wasn't that his name? He used to be with you?
Devin Hughes.
So, well, we could get Mike Fuhrer to do a spot bill. And that bought us time. And so he introduced a spot bill for us, and then we amended it with the microstamping language. Now, someone else could have taken Mike Fuhrer's spot bill and introduced the bill. He did the spot bill, that was a placeholder, but it didn't mean Mike Fuhrer had to be the one introducing the bill. He could have given it to other legislators. So it bought us more time and flexibility. So I don't think I would give up quite yet.
Okay.
But just for the future in general, you want to start early.
Okay. So then one of the viewers asked, can you distinguish between laws and regulations? Can regulations ever be useful in achieving our GVP goals?
Well, many of our laws result in regulations. So, for example, the microstamping law that we passed when we ever passed it in first bill I worked on, I should know, 2006, I guess we got passed, 2007. There's holds up, there's legal challenges to it, but while that was unfolding, the Department of Justice wanted to get ready to implement the law, and so they started to work on regulations of how it actually be implemented, and that was kind of a complicated policy. This feature we're requiring handguns to have, and we and the coalition actually submitted letters regarding the regulations and attended hearings about the regulations to make sure that that law would be implemented how we wanted. So very often a law is passed, and then an agency, be it DOJ or Department of Education or wherever it is, then they have to draft regulations to implement that law. And often there's a hearing, there's a comment period and hearing on those regulations.
Yeah, I just want to add, like, for example, some legislation did pass, and now another group that we're involved with is trying to pressure the California Department of Justice to write the regulations so it could be implemented. You know, the regulations need to be written for that particular law. So now I'm going to ask Kareem to ask his question, because I don't really understand it.
Thank you. I'm not the first one not understanding what I'm trying to say. I have 6 questions, and I can go one by one if you may. I just want to understand that I understood you correctly. I want to make sure I understood you correctly. You said that a legislator cannot have more than 20 years combined max between the two houses?
12 years. 12 years.
12 years max, okay.
So 6 terms in Assembly, 3 in the Senate, or a combination thereof, but not over 12 years.
Okay, thank you. How does lobbying works? If I want to speak to a legislator in any house, do I need to sign up and say, hey, I'm Kareem, I'm a lobbying person now? How does that work?
So if lobbying is to try and sway an opinion, any of us and all of us should be lobbyists, communicating our opinion and trying to influence a legislator's position on the issue. There's sort of 2 categories of lobbyists: professional lobbyists who maybe lobbyists for a big organization, or a contract lobbyist that has maybe 5 to 10 different clients. And they're paid and they have disclosures. And often these are people who are former staff or former legislators, and they have relationships and they know process really well, and they're good at reading bills and all that kind of stuff. So we have that. And Brady's fortunate enough now, they replaced me with a contract lobbyist. And Giffords has one too now. I did it as a volunteer, which any of you can do, but if you do it over and over and are in these hearings over and over, you get known and establish relationships and develop policy expertise, and where they almost treat you as a professional lobbyist in terms of keeping you informed and seeking your opinion and that kind of thing. But for an individual, you can knock on any door and voice your opinion. Now, it's very unlikely you would meet with a legislator without an appointment. It's harder to get appointments with the legislature for whom you're not a constituent. But as a constituent, you can call an office or email an office and ask for a meeting, depending, they may say, well, no, why don't you meet with my staff instead? And I actually do not, and I think that's fine, because there are so many bills, so many policies, legislators really count on their staff to advise them. And the kind of the joke in the Capitol is, well, if you can't meet the staff, then the legislature will do. Because the staff really they're the ones who study these bills and advise the legislator, and will give you the time and will follow up. So don't be discouraged if you can't get a meeting with the legislature and you're meeting with staff. Now, what I recommend, if you're looking at a policy, you want to influence legislators, put together a small group. And, if you're in the LA area, meeting with a group of LA legislators, if you have, the more constituents you have from these various legislators, the better. But you don't have to be constituents, because any decision they make is affecting everyone in our state. So I think all of us are lobbyists, can make our arguments, try to sway opinion. Doors are open. You can go in, and anytime you can go in and drop a letter or email a letter, mail a letter, snail mail a letter. And if you're in Sacramento, you can go into any door and try and speak to staff. They won't not always be available, or better, make an appointment so that they are available.
Thank you so much. If we wanted to have an action happening, an event is happening, a mass murder is happening, and we want to have a punch action, what is the most effective way to lobby? Is it phone calls? Is it written letters? Is it email? Is it a combination of all of that?
Well, I would say petitions are least effective. I think, it used to be faxing. People don't really fax anymore, do they? I think a thoughtful letter and a phone call, I would do both of those.
Okay. I'm going to keep going down my list.
Now, the letter, I suppose, could be, I would email the letter and send it snail mail and phone.
Okay. So paper works still today.
Yeah.
How do you learn how to draft a bill or learn the bill language? I'm an immigrant, and as you can hear, I'm not very fluent in English, but I want to really suggest ideas. Like, I want all new gun sales to be bright pink. How can I? It's just a silly idea, but just for how do I move? How can I seriously propose a draft to a legislator, and they can read it and say, oh, okay, this is pro enough, so I can start from that.
Right. So, you as a citizen, just like I as a citizen, don't need to have the skills to draft the text of a bill. I'm not an attorney. I never really looked at laws before I became involved with gun violence prevention with Brady and started advocating for them on policy. I started reading bills and learning sort of the language, how bills are organized. I learned a great deal from the Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence, just little things like I notice attorneys always say existing law, because law often changes, right? We keep changing laws. So they always use this term existing law. So being around it. I've only drafted one bill in all those bills I worked on. And I just kind of did a repeat of a bill we had done before, changed the language a little bit. And I was very nervous doing it, to tell the truth. But that bill, again, got sent to Legislative Council, and they actually do becomes the official text of the bill. So your idea about, well, let's ban the sale of pink guns or whatever, I don't think you need to know how to put that in legal language. I think for you, going to a legislator, trying to get them to carry this, be more, this is the idea I have. I want to ban the sale of pink guns. And this is why we need this bill, because research has shown that if a gun is pink, I don't know, women are more likely to use that gun in suicide than if it's black, whatever the reason is, some kind of reason. There should be a reason, a benefit why you want to do this. And I think you need to be able to explain that. But in terms of actual language of the bill, if you can't, the staff of the legislature will submit the bill request to Leg Council with some maybe draft language or these ideas, and they will come up with the official language. So I think it's more you as a citizen would need, the bill idea and good reasons for why to do it. And other aspects of it, like are the other colors close to pink that we need to consider, and kind of try and think more broadly, what needs to be included that I'm not thinking about right now, so you're not missing something.
Thank you. Do you know of legislators that have a kitchen cabinet outside of their staff? Sometimes I know leaders who make sure they have, I will say, supporters, regular supporters, and are not staffers. And they have regular meetings with those groups of informal people just to hear from their constituents. They know that if I contact Margot, Kareem, and Megan, they will have a feedback regarding that issue, something like that. And they have those meetings on a regular manners. Is that something that happens, or they just depend on their staff, period? Is this even legal?
Yeah, well, I think legislators are meeting with groups all the time. They should be. The legislative count, when the legislature's not in session, remember, this is their full-time job. They are often going to meetings with different groups, and they're going to events and celebrations and parades, but they're also, I think a good legislator is constantly meeting with different groups, particularly in their district, maybe it's the Chamber of Congress or, the Educators Association, depending on their area of interest. But they're responsible to all their constituents and all the different issues they care about. Now, again, generally a legislator will pick some areas of particular interest,
Mm-hmm.
and become more knowledgeable in those areas, and meet with the stakeholders in those areas. I mentioned the California Gun Violence Coalition. We have had legislators or their staff at time participate in our meetings. Particularly in the early days, we had some staff in our meetings, and so there was a tighter relationship among legislators who cared about gun violence prevention and our California coalition.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I'm sorry.
One last question, and I will give the floor. I'm sorry. But it's such an interesting thing, and I have such a knowledgeable person right there. I'm grabbing all the time I can. Last question. So, what if a house initiate a bill, and it's a perfect bill? Then it goes to what if the House initiate a perfect bill and then goes to the Senate, and the Senate put an amendment that get the bill, and the bill come back? What are the recourse that we have to say this amendment is terrible, we cannot do anything from there?
Right. So generally there aren't poison pill amendments in California. That can happen, but generally the way it works when a bill is amended is it's going through the committee process, usually the public safety, usually the policy committee, sometimes in appropriates too, to lower costs. And they have some issue with the bill or what it's going to do, or this isn't going to work or whatever. And the committee will suggest amendments to the author of the bill, and the author will take the amendments to get the bill out committee. If the author finds it unacceptable, they can take the risk of trying to get the bill passed by the committee without the amendments, but that will probably be difficult to do. Now, it's more likely that there's pushback against a bill in the opposite house. Assembly members favor their colleagues' bills, and likewise in the Senate. And so there may be amendments in the Senate more amendments to a bill in the opposite house. But again, the legislator accepts the amendments. If they don't, probably the bill is going to die. Now, there is a process. If there are amendments in the opposite house and it comes back for concurrence, and there is disagreement in the House of Origin about the amendments, from this opposite house, it can go to what's called, I think it's called conference committee, where they try and work out those amendments. And that would, then that, what they come up with would have to go to both houses again to be voted on.
Thank you so much for taking the time to answer my question. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, everybody. I'm sorry we can't continue on, but this is the time frame for our Lunch and Learn. If you have any more questions that you would like us to forward on to Amanda, please email them to me at wagv@wagv.org. Thank you so much, Amanda, for this. It was great and really informative. And now I know I better start emailing those legislators that introduced bills that went on to a quiet death last year. And I want to see if they're going to reintroduce them. And I need to do that today. So thank you, everyone. And thank you, Amanda. Bye.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions, just send my way.
Will do. Will do. Thanks, everyone. See you all soon.
Thank you.